Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. It's always a special time when we can have one of my favorite humans on the planet, Simon Rosenberg, joining us, Hopium Chronicles. Uh, let's just start by saying if you don't subscribe, you should be a paying subscriber to Hopium Chronicles. You need to stop whatever you're doing in your life and get on it right now. It's I have a very short list of something I try to read every day, and it's really at the top. Um,
Thank you, Stuart.
After all these years of working on the Republican side, it is such a delight and a relief and a pleasure and an education to be able to be on the same side as Simon. So, listen, brother, I don't know what we're going to talk about. There's nothing going on, but uh, you're a great consumer and analyst of polling. And
Yeah.
what are you seeing out there that's interesting?
So one thing we should all be aware of is that this is a very choppy and developing
Yeah,
situation. The polling is going to, in all likelihood, be all over the place for a while because it's something that's emerging and unfolding in front of our eyes. And voters have very differing degrees of understanding of what's happening, right? And usually it takes, in any kind of major event, it takes 2 to 3 weeks for people who are on the outer edges of the information game every day to sort of become aware of things. But look, what we've seen just in the credible polling we've had in last taken since the events of the weekend, the YouGov has been polling, very credible independent pollster has been polling throughout this period, and they released a bunch of data yesterday, and they had in
You're
their.
breaking up. Something weird is happening. You're breaking up.
Am I breaking up? Is that
Uh,
sorry? Is that better,
oh,
gang?
that's better. That's better. Yeah, yeah. I'm
Okay,
sure.
sorry about that. Yeah, so YouGov had Trump in their weekly track last week, had Trump only -4 in job approval. Then the CBS poll they released on Sunday was -10. Their own track they released yesterday, he was -13. So there was a drop. Not all other polls have seen that level of drop, but there's no evidence that people are rallying behind him, right? There just isn't any data showing him improving his standing. The second thing is they asked a lot of questions about what's happening. And Trump had on all the ways that you measured what he was doing, deportations, the use of the Marines and the military, he was in negative territory. There wasn't again any kind of evidence. And this, Stuart, the thing to look for and what they want is they want to see the country rallying behind him in this time of crisis. And that isn't happening. And he's also not getting up into the 40s. So meaning that he's not even pulling all Republicans on some of these actions. There's still a lot of people who are not so sure. But I think that, look, my view about what's really happening here, like just taking a step back,
Yeah.
is that I think Trump's presidency has been troubled and it's failing, and his economic plan isn't working, and he's getting beaten in the courts. He had to return Abrego Garcia. His tariff plans were declared illegal by two different courts. Putin is tossing him around like a rag doll on the global stage. The Chinese are mocking and laughing at him. He can't get any trade deals done. And his reconciliation bill is in trouble because it's a very bad bill that will do incredible harm to the American economy. And the senators are indicating significant reticence about jumping on board this thing. And so then the big thing happened, right? Which is last week, Elon just not only broke up with Trump, but he crapped all over him in ways that no one has ever spoken to Trump like that before. No one who had access to the MAGA audience the way that Musk does spoke about Trump the way that he did. And I think Trump, Elon emasculated Trump. He really wounded his psyche and within a few hours of all of that, we saw this kind of dramatic escalation happening in Los Angeles. And I don't think these things are unrelated. I mean, I think they needed to change the narrative from Elon, mocking him and making fun of him, calling for his removal from office and all the things that he did. And I think that they found this kind of spastic explosion of strength, right, in the way that they think about things to reestablish after having been emasculated and had his nuts cut off by Elon last week, where he looked weak and pathetic and desperate. They needed to do something to make him look strong. And so Stephen Miller finally got his way, and they've now brought 5,000 National Guard and Marines to LA over protests that started with a couple hundred people on a street corner. Wild overreaction to what's happened against the wishes of, the governor and the mayor. And now they're threatening to do this in other places too. And so we're in a place where, we've taken one more step towards something that is not a democracy, and it's a
So
dangerous time.
let me ask you, what should the Democratic Party's messaging be about this? So, door number one could be stressing how they are strong on immigration. I mean, Obama deported over 4 million and did it without managing to have, the Battle of Brentwood. Or, and then maybe they're not contradictory, or they can be complementary, reminding people that this isn't what they voted for. This is chaos. But anyway, you tell me, what do you think?
No, look, I think it's important, in what I've written on social media and in Hopium, is that every Democrat should be doing a press conference backing up Gavin Newsom in the state of California, because this is an attack on all of us. This isn't about California or Los Angeles. This is about rule of law and the Constitution, and Trump, operating in a very explicit way outside of our American tradition and norms in ways that feel very much authoritarian. And so I think, there needs to be an understanding that this is a fight for all of us and not something limited to California and Gavin Newsom. And I do think every Democrat should be educating their constituents about the stakes of what's happening here, which again is, step 27 in this movement towards, a walking away from our constitutional order. The second thing is, we also have to be, I think, very careful to disaggregate Trump's strength on the border, which is about preventing future immigrants from coming into the country, with his treatment and public opinion about people who are already here.
Yeah.
And there is a very significant difference in polling on this. And oftentimes commentators get this a little bit confused. I've been an immigration advocate. I've worked at a policy level in immigration for 2 decades. I know these issues inside and out, the polling. And you had this week in Florida, the head of Latinos for Trump, the woman who founded Latinos for Trump, a state senator Garcia, called Trump's immigration strategy and his escalation of the last few weeks unacceptable and inhumane. And it's because, and the public wants humane treatment of people who are here, who are non-criminals, right? And the truth is, Trump always lied about the percentage of the immigrants that he was going to target that were that were criminals. And what they're really doing, and what they've sort of unmasked in the last few weeks, is that this has been the goal of the restrictionist movement that was in the Republican Party and the right wing, Stuart, that you know well, that has wanted to remove 10 to 15 million immigrants from the United States. And it's not about criminal migrants. It's about removing literally tens of millions of people from the US. This is their stated goal. And what's happened is, I think part of the other reason there was this dramatic escalation is that it's become very clear that ICE and DHS can't do this. They're not equipped, they're not trained, they don't know how to operate in urban environments where they're going into neighborhoods and pulling people out of neighborhoods. I mean, there was a huge failure of ICE in Paramount the other day. They got stuck there by a couple hundred, local people who wouldn't let them out. And so what they needed to bring in the military for 2 reasons. One is, they've grown aware that ICE and DHS can't remove 10 to 15 million people on their own. They need help. And the second thing is, the other part of the strategy is to sort of terrorize these immigrant communities so they'll self-deport. And the truth is, they weren't self-deporting, despite all the Oz, the noises coming from Oz, right? People weren't leaving. Their families are here. Their kids are in school. They have jobs, right? And many of whom were legal, right? There's also legal immigrants who are being targeted in this massive campaign to get rid of all these folks. And so they needed to do something to be even more scary than they were, to try to scare people into self-deporting. And that's why I think you're going to see now a perpetual use of the military as a way of creating this greater intimidation and fear. And that's where we are. And it's because their strategy was failing. They panicked, and they went to a place that was outside of rule of law and outside, in my view, outside what is acceptable in a democracy like ours.
So let me ask you a question. I sometimes, in a fit of nostalgia, if nothing else, you can go on the internet and look at this extraordinary exchange between Bush and Reagan in the 1980 primary in a debate they had in Texas. And they basically are arguing about who's more liberal on immigration. I mean, it is like something you feel like an artifact from a lost civilization, like you've stumbled across something from the Aztecs, or human sacrifice. And Bush gets asked a question, do you think that illegals should be allowed to go to public schools? And his answer, I think, is perfectly pitch perfect. Like, what are we going to do with these people? They're here. So here's my question.
Yeah.
There are 11 million, however many you pick, 11.
Yeah.
The higher the number is, almost the better it is.
Yeah.
Do you think the Democratic Party should play a role in saying to the American public, what do you want to do with these people? You have 11 million people.
Well,
I mean, the answer on Medicare, when you get asked, do you want Medicare for illegals? The answer is simple. Like, look, try passing a law that people aren't going to get sick. They're not going to be in car accidents. Pass all those laws. It's not going to work. And so where are they going to end up? They're going to end up at the emergency room. And that's the single most expensive method of healthcare delivery that exists.
Yeah, I
so
mean,
you're saving money with Medicare.
Yeah, I mean, illegal immigrants are not eligible for federal programs of any kind, right? They're not eligible for Medicaid, Medicare, welfare. They have no access to any of those programs. California has created a separate standalone California program to provide Medicaid-like services to the undocumented community in California. But at a federal level, they have no access to any of this. I mean, this is why when you look at what's called the worker participation rate, the community of people in America who work at the highest, who work the most are actually undocumented immigrants, because there's no social safety net for them. If they're not working, they have no money. And so this idea that there's this indolent criminal population, I mean, Stuart, the other stat that people don't understand is that, the crime rate of both undocumented immigrants and legal immigrants is about half of the crime rate of native born, and certainly far lower than the crime rate of the guy in the Oval Office, for example, right, who is a serial criminal. And so a lot of these myths about the indolent criminality, you hear, the DHS secretary now claiming that LA is a criminal city, right? The whole city is full of criminals, right? They're just conflating. This is all lies and stuff that you are aware is modern day version of Willie Horton, right? Is the same kind of painting of those people as criminal aliens who need to be removed from the country. The truth is that there has never been a time in the last 20 years where there isn't majority support in the country for leaving all the undocumented immigrants in the country. There's never been a poll.
It's Reagan in 86 signed a bill that made everybody in the country before 83 legal.
Well, listen, Reagan did amnesty, right? The last actual legitimate amnesty where people could just come under any condition, with no condition, was under Ronald Reagan. George Bush, the second Bush, was a champion of comprehensive immigration reform and the legalization of the 11 million a year.
The first thing I ever filmed for Bush was the opening of a bridge between Mexico and Texas. A fucking bridge. Listen, and I remember because I went off to shoot something and I was late and they left me in Mexico, which was my lesson. Like, don't miss the motorcade.
Stay on the right side of the bridge, right?
I called them up in Austin. I said, what are you going to do? And they go, you can get to America. Lots of people do.
Listen, in the 2004 election, when I was in charge of the Spanish language communications as an outside group against Bush in the 2004 election, one of the last ads that ran in Spanish for the Bush campaign, and I always tell people that the Bush campaign in 2004 had two fundamental images in their ads. One was minivans, which is like, with me, you get a better life, right? You get a minivan. And then the other was stained glass windows, right? But never actually mentioning anything about the Catholic Church. But in that ad, there are young people waving Mexican flags in the ad for Bush. And we were a little surprised, right?
Well,
That,
let me tell you the backstory of that.
yeah,
I've always hated stock footage because it looks like stock footage.
yep.
Plus, stock footage is increasingly expensive. So I was able to talk the Bush campaign into committing to spending a lot of money up front to shoot our own stock footage. So we went to Miami in January and spent 2 weeks with a world-class director shooting images that we thought, what are we going to need? So that's where our minivans came from. We put all these people in minivans. That's where we did all of this
I was so sick of those minivans by the end of the campaign.
It was so great because we could use it over and over and not have to pay for it again. We had a sunk cost.
Yeah.
And we could frame it the way we wanted to. We could do the whole thing. So you weren't, anyway. So
Stuart, let me answer your question, right? What should Democrats do? We have to lean into this, right? The public opinion's on our side, and the greatest, and frankly, the rule of law is on our side, the morality's on our side. The greatest challenge we have is that we have to act with greater force and strength and stick to our positions and fight like hell for them. I think the thing that is harming the Democratic Party right now is that we're not clearly fighting and defending the things that we believe with hard enough. And therefore, regardless of whether you think we're right or wrong, we don't look strong and forceful. We don't look like we're willing to fight for everyday people or fight for any cause, right? People want to believe that we have the strength to fight for them, to make their lives better. We're not conveying that as a national party right now. And I think it's a problem. And I think this is where Gavin Newsom has excelled in recent days, which is that,
I mean, I've always been a believer, strong and wrong is better than weak and right.
Well, we're learning that powerfully as a nation right now, right? Is that Trump is wrong on everything, but people perceive him as being a fighter and strong and willing to do what's required to get what he wants. And this issue of strength and weakness, which is something, you and I haven't had this conversation, but a major thing that I've been writing about and talking about in my public commentary is that Democrats really have to go to school on this concept of strength, strong and weak, winning and losing. I think it's a central reason why we actually didn't win the presidential election, is that so much of modern Republican politics is operating in a narrow prism of strong and weak, winning and losing. And we don't even think that way. Like, we don't test strength of leadership in our polling and in our focus groups. We are very issue based, and we have to really start recognizing that for those the things that we missed in 2024. Well, a huge amount of people's understanding of politics is not about issues. It's about all this other stuff. Are they good looking? Are they charming? Are they funny? Are they strong? Right? Are they willing to fight? Are they strong enough to fight for me?
I couldn't agree more. And that's part of what our mission has been in the Lincoln Project, because we kind of came from that perspective. I would start with a foreign policy anchor for that. To me, the Democratic Party has a chance, the first they've had really since the Scoop Jackson days, to be the party of strength. It is a true statement that Bernie Sanders is to the right on foreign policy of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And, he honeymooned there, but he didn't fall in love with Putin. I would blow up stuff like when Nancy Pelosi goes to Taiwan. That's like, holy shit, that's fantastic. And there still is a large percentage of the Republican Party of a certain age that finds being on the side of Putin to be very disorienting. And I think it reflects those values. So I would start with that, and then I would drive it straight on. It is weak when you need the military. It is weak when you have to use masked men to do this. This isn't what strong leaders do. It's what weak leaders do. And I would wrap myself in iconography of flags and the military and mock Trump.
Look, we have to be the patriots and he the betrayer, right? 100%. I mean, that's the way that we have to position this. And I think for Democrats,
you have the added benefit that's true.
Right. And I also think that going back to something this is one of the reasons I've really enjoyed our discussions, is because we've been around a little bit and seen a lot of stuff, and we've been on other sides of some fights, and it's fun to hear your version of stories that I haven't heard on things that I worked on, right, from the other side. But we are in a place right now as a family where there is this kind of knee-jerk thing where we need to stay focused on one issue and on prices or affordability, and that we have to do it to the exclusion of everything else, not
Totally wrong.
not lead with it. Like there's a
Totally wrong.
difference between leading with something and only talking about one thing.
Look, I think, that's not the way the world works anymore. I mean, it used to be,
Go ahead. I want to hear
we
that.
could try to have like an education week. You could try. Now, that never worked, but you had a lot better chance when you had a much more unified system of message delivery. I can remember from the 2000 campaign, the New York Times then would go online at midnight Eastern time, and you could sit there and look at your watch, and that was 11 o'clock Austin time. About 11:15, all these reporters would be calling you, and they'd be using the New York Times as basically assignment editors. That world doesn't exist anymore, and there's no reason that you can't have AOC and Bernie out there saying one thing, and Newsom hitting on another. That's just how we consume information now. There aren't any gatekeepers. So yeah, I think that is a hugely important lesson.
Well, and I think what I throw out to you, Stuart, is that the two things that I feel are missing from our current narrative and story. So first of all, we have to speak in narrative and stories, and not rely on ad testing to tell us what to believe.
Jesus,
ad testing is such an incredibly narrow way of understanding information, right?
The Steve Jobs quote about, did they focus group and test Apple? He said, if Henry Ford had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses.
So I think there are two areas. Let's just put an exclamation point on what we just discussed, right? We need to tap into love of country and patriotism and the emotional well of that, right? We can't only be talking about Medicaid and prices and affordability, which is critical and important, and it's driven Trump's numbers down. But we also have to reach people in emotional places. And Trump is going to use this parade this weekend, right, to really surround himself with very classical American iconography, to use the term that you used, in a time when he's betraying the country, right? And this is why this becomes kind of an incredible cover for him. He was at Fort Bragg yesterday. He wants this kind of being the American empire, right? Like without actually acting like an American president, right? He's acting like an authoritarian. But the other one, it's patriotism, love of country, and it's strength. And it's the willingness that people have to believe that we're not only on their side, but that we're willing to fight for them. And I think we have not adequately, explored both of those things in our current understanding of what we need to do now. And so we've been slow to react to his creeping authoritarianism. We want to keep talking about prices or Medicaid, the Medicaid cuts and so on. And so I think, to your point, we can do more than one thing at a time, and that we need to, because I think we're missing opportunities to make our core narrative and storytelling as strong as it needs to be.
There's a tentativeness to it. I would say, if I were in the Democratic Party, I would say you cannot be a patriot and vote for Pete Hegseth. So they'd say, well, wait a second, are you calling John Thune unpatriotic? And my answer would be yes. I am saying that. It is not patriotic. It is not patriotic when you let Laura Loomer pick the national security team. That is something that no patriot would do. And there seems to be this pulling back, this naive.
It's a reticence.
And it's like, well, we're still a governing party. I thought Jonathan Laston Bullock wrote, which I think is going to be one of the sustaining pieces people are going to go back and read, that the Democratic Party needs to see itself as a dissident movement, that it's not a normal political party at a normal time. And you have to go think of yourself as what did these movements do, and start operating like that. If you get the House, the first bill I would introduce is cut off all funding for the executive branch, 100%. And then I would go to nationalize Starlink and SpaceX. I do that the first fucking day. They say that we're at war. Let's use the Defense Procurement Act then. Let's do it.
Well, let me give you another example, right? Just in the last couple of days, right? The Robert Kennedy, in his when he was sworn, in his testimony, when he was in his hearings to become HHS secretary, said he would not only would he not replace the vaccine advisory board, but that he wouldn't touch it at all, that he wouldn't make any changes. He committed to that multiple times under questioning, because there was a lot of worry that he was going to really sort of out himself as super anti-vax man, right? So under oath, he committed to do that. And on Monday, he fired the entire committee.
Yeah.
So Chuck Schumer yesterday made a video where he said, I want Kennedy to reverse this decision and reinstate these people. What he also should have said is, I'm also filing, criminal charges. I'm sending a criminal referral to the Justice Department for his lying under oath and breaking and committing a felony, a congressional felony. We have not, sent criminal referrals to DOJ that would not be acted upon. That's okay. Right. For what Musk has done, or what Doge has done, or for what Kennedy just did.
I don't understand this.
I don't understand it. I've been calling on this since February, frankly, in my own opium. And this is where, as you talk about the evolution, right, of where we have to get to, Robert Kennedy broke the law. He's a criminal now, and we should treat him that way, as opposed to begging him to reverse an action that, of course, he's not going to reverse. And so Schumer's instinct about sort of diving into this was correct, but his assessment of what the ask was insufficient for the moment. And I think, and because what we've been unable to do is to assert and attach the sense of criminality to what's happened in Washington, the dismantling of the government. Elon Musk has probably broken more laws, and committed more crimes than anyone in American history.
Look, we got to go. Sam messaged me. We got to
go. We talk all day.
This has been one of my things. I think Democratic attorney generals, or I'd love it if a Republican would do it. I don't care. They're not. What these masked men are doing is breaking the law. How would you respond to masked people showing up with stuff you can buy off eBay, taking people and disappearing them? You file criminal charges. You'd arrest them. It's called kidnapping and human trafficking. And I think these attorney generals should be in charges against these people. That's what they should have done in the Maryland case. Yeah. All right, brother. Listen, we got to go.
Until next time. Keep up the great work. It's always great to be with you, Stuart. And thanks for all that you guys are doing. It's inspiring and motivates me every day.
Let me just say again, subscribe to Hopium Chronicles. It's really unlike anything else. What Simon is doing over there is totally unique. I find it fascinating. So thank you. And keep supporting Lincoln Square. Nobody else is going to save us. We got to save ourselves. So thank you, and talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody.